Today we're talking about HTMX, developing complex front ends without complex workflows. We're going to start with the resources that I use, kind of where this came from and what inspired giving this. Wanted to put that up front in case anyone needs to drop. Then we'll talk about what hypermedia is, which is the driving factor for HTMX. We'll look at HTMX and then also how it works with .NET as your server side of things, and talk about why we like it and why a lot of people don't like it. And there's a lot to cover, but I should have some time for questions. I do have the chat hidden though, so if you have a hold the phone moment, you can shout out and stop me. I won't see it written. My name is Patrick McVitty-Mill. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an independent consultant, mainly in the .NET web space, but also with system architectures and DevOps enhancements and migrations, and then plenty of other odds and ends. I do coaching too. And I disappear from time to time. I'm a long distance hiker, so yeah, I was away. Gosh, 6 years ago now. I left for 6 months to do the Appalachian Trail, and then last year, the stars aligned for me to up and leave again for about another 6 months, but this time in Europe, walking the Camino de Santiago del Norte, and then also did a lot of other stuff, camper vanning in Bavaria and in Ireland, and did some hikes in Greece, just lots of, getting around. So I do that. I love music. I'm an amateur, I am an amateur, but I'm a certified now volunteer radio host here in Austin on Co-op 91.7 FM. I garden, I do art, and I like hanging out. You can find me online at PMCVTM, and I'm slowly rebuilding my former handle at Loud and Abrasive for all my art and stuff. So starting with these sources, a lot of this comes from the Hypermedia Systems book that came out this year. It's free online, and it's from the authors of HTMX. So of course, it's a excellent resource for that. The other piece is actually where I first learned about HTMX is from Khalid Abu-Ahmed's blog. He's got a ton of great content. He's a dev, I guess DevRel, dev advocate, whatever they're called these days, at JetBrains. So he's got a lot of really great .NET stuff. But I first saw that he's got a nice tutorial series and a lot of individual blogs about different, kind of cookbook use cases. And then finally, there is now an O'Reilly book called Server-Driven Web Apps with HTMX. If you like the O'Reilly style, then it's a great way to learn this. The Hypermedia Systems book and even the HTMX website have just tons of examples. The book gets a lot more into the thinking of it all. But we won't be doing a lot of deep dive into a full solution of code. We are going to look at kind of some representative examples and talk about some of the how it works and the complexities and considerations you would have. So if you want to give me, a razor page solution with all of this in it, I would look at Khalid's series, and then also just for general HTMX on their website and in that book. So what is hypermedia? This might be old news, but hypermedia is a media that includes nonlinear branching from one location in the media to another. The prefix hyper comes from Greek hyper, which means beyond or over. So that means that hypermedia goes beyond the normal passively consumed media like magazines and newspapers, wherein you're not just flipping from page to page or even jumping to page, you're able to traverse in ways that, physically would be challenging. I don't know if anyone's attempted that. That seems like a fun, dev summer camp activity to get kids to make a physical web page and jump around. Hypermedia is driven by controls. So this is the hypermedia control differentiates it from regular media. Those are the elements that describe or control some sort of interaction often with a remote server, by encoding information about that interaction directly and completely within itself. And that, in practice, when we're writing web apps, these are our links and our forms. The fact that they're completely self-contained goes a lot into the ethos of how we build a system with HTMX and with hypermedia in mind. Thinking about just a hypermedia system, we're going to have some form of hypermedia, a communication protocol to use, a server to deliver hypermedia by request, and then a client to interpret those responses. Like, it's the web. So we think about that at a base level. HTML is our form of hypermedia to deliver. We're going to deliver it over HTTP. You can use all sorts of servers to respond to those requests, to accept those requests, and then ultimately your browser is the client to interpret those responses. The browser we think of as, as a web browser. It's how you get online, but it's or maybe it's how you run your JavaScript, but it's really intended to be this. It's super crazy complex for being able to read and interpret hypermedia and present that back out to you, the user. Hypermedia and hypertext is all around us in HTML and HTTP. The HT is for hypertext. So this is, we're going all the way back with this sort of stuff. Going a little bit forward is REST and hate OAS. A lot of people say hate OAS. I'm going to say hateous, because I think the world's got enough hate in it as it is. But anyways, REST is representational state transfer. Hateous is hypermedia as the engine of application state. These come from Roy Fielding's dissertation in 2000, where he sort of lays out, like, this internet thing, this web thing needs some constraints, it needs some guidelines. So he talks about, you need a client server, you should have caching, you should have a uniform way to arrive at a resource, like URLs. That was a novel idea, that like everything should have a URL. The thing that we care the most about in this kind of context of our approach is the uniform interface. So that means that, like we said before, messages are self-describing. I guess these are messages in the request response sort of way, that they're all self-describing. So all the information you need to interpret a request is there with the request, and similarly with the response coming back. And then the media that you return encodes all of the current state and any possible changes. So that's the engine of application state part. The hypermedia is going to come back with everything you could possibly do, everything that is there in the state and what can be done with it without any side channels. So not having to consult a book or make a call or read documentation. When you get the response, you know what to do with the media right there and where to go. There's a lot more on this. I've got, when I share the slides, you can go down and read more, or, Wikipedia is a great resource. There's lots here, but we won't get too much into it. Thinking about hypermedia as an API. So here's a URL for a resource. We're using my favorite domain with Fish Center Live, in which the famous sports show where fish collect coins for points. It's a television series, so we've got seasons. So here we're getting the fish from season 1. Pretty straightforward resource. Looking at it as hypermedia, we get back, it's a page, right? We're looking at the fish in our header. We're looking at season 1. Then we've got links to, we've got a disabled link to the previous season, since it's season 1. We've got a link to season 2 as the next season. We've got an interaction we can do with the fish. We can add a fish that, this is my fan website, where I'm making sure everyone knows who was on season 1. And we can see there within our list of fish, we've got Flump. There's a link to feed him, as well as a link to remove him with that URL. Same thing with Old Blue, although Old Blue just has a remove link. So this is not like what a typical API that we think about today would not, you don't want to get this. You'd say, what the heck, where's my JSON? Today, when we say API, and even when we say REST API, which if you want to be super pedantic about it, is a misnomer. They don't follow REST as defined. But when we talk about REST APIs, we're talking about JSON data APIs for single page applications. So instead of having links and forms, we've got AJAX communicating with the server behind the scenes, called by JavaScript. We've got JSON to interpret that data to, we get a response. It's just the data that we then, in order to present it, feed it through a JavaScript representation of a visual model that then renders out. So the messages aren't self-describing. They're not even media really. And then they're stored in a separate model, and then they react with DOM updates through the JavaScript instead of just using the client to render the media as it's presented. So here's what you might have thought fish season 1 would deliver. We've got the season, we've got the fish, links to their details or links that we might do something with, their name and their status, which wasn't obvious in the hypermedia response, but we don't know what to do with this. We don't know that there's no season 0. We don't know that there is a season 2. There's no indication that we can feed Thwomp because he's hungry, or that we can't feed Old Blue because he's well fed, or to remove them, or if there's a detail page. And all of that extra info requires us to read documentation and then write our JavaScript so that the user doesn't have to wonder about that. But we're in this communication line between client and server, we are losing all of that context. We're probably making some additional requests to get that other info out of here, which, the not super great. Maybe poor API design, you might say. I don't know. There's a whole lots to get into that. So if that's bad, if I'm saying that's bad, how do we get there? It's pretty well understood that our traditional, web 1.0 apps that just use those hypermedia controls is a poor UX these days. It feels clunky. The whole page refreshes. There's no bells or whistles. It doesn't feel as smooth. So people didn't like that. And as JavaScript started getting more advanced, we're able to add some of those niceties, and then the developer experience of adding that JavaScript got nasty. So this this JavaScript ecosystem starts rapidly building in order to support better frameworks and models for doing these fancy updates. I think my camera just got cut off. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Hear you. I did see your camera cut out. I don't know why.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I just got a notification. It said something about, I got a pop-up. All right, good. Good. Anyways, so JavaScript ecosystem adapting fast to enable writing these rich user experiences, right? We want a good user experience on the web. Meanwhile, developing hashes in JSON is super painful. People have tried it, sending links in your JSON objects. It's ugly. So people we kind of let go of that idea. Browsers are really advanced. They can interpret that in a cleaner way. We don't want to reinvent that wheel. And then meanwhile, HTML is super unchanged. It's very slow. We get, new elements to express what a page means in a different way. Great for accessibility and stuff, but not from a developing good user experiences. You can't even do non-get and post with just plain HTML. You have to use AJAX. Enter HTMX. Created by Carson Gross, who also created Intercooler.js, which is sort of the 1.0 to HTMX. It has a kinship with Unpoly, which is a progressive enhancement framework that's a little more wholesale, as well as with Hotwire and Turbo. Those came out a few years ago now from the Basecamp folks. And that's kind of the Ruby flavor of it. Also a little bit more robust of a library compared to HTMX. Talking about progressive enhancement with Poly, this is an important idea with HTMX as well. It's a content-focused design strategy. So where your site can work without JavaScript and then is enhanced with that scripting functionality. So your form still submits, your links still go to a page. Then if you do some JavaScript, it gets nicer. You get live updates or that sort of thing. This is, or I guess was impossible to do with single page applications. Now with server side rendering kind of getting more into vogue, it's getting better. But the main point of Unpoly is to enable this. It's a natural fit with HTMX and Hotwire, but it's not as it's not baked in. There are elements of it that will not be progressive enhancements that you will need JavaScript for. But if you want to write a progressive enhancement app, these are good tools for you. As Strong Bad says, I can't teach you everything, but we can start with the basics. HTMX is a low-level, lightweight JavaScript framework. It's a library. I think I believe there's an essay on their website that's like, is it a library or is it a framework? It's a library that the way you end up using it becomes the framework by which you develop. So I'll call it a framework. It's for modern UX and multi-page apps. So not single-page apps, still old-style multi-page apps with that the modern feel that you get from a single page app. It is a extension of HTML. That's what the X is for. That is very attribute driven. So if you have poked around the code, they add a whole bunch of custom attributes, and we'll look at that in a second. It's enhanced with headers and special events and a lot more behind the scenes that you can expand on it from there. It's made with hypermedia systems in mind. We're doing this, for hypermedia. You want to install it? It's a script. Just pop it in there. It's 164 kilobytes or 50 minified. They do. The creators are real characters online, but they get in a lot of trouble on Twitter and those places. But they have been encouraging using the unminified one so that you can let people read source and see what's happening. And I think that's an interesting idea. But I found it on their CDN. It's smaller than the favicon. So boy, just pop that in there. From the CDN on Unpackage, you can also download it. It takes just a second. You can also install it with your tools. So if you're using Node or you're using some other JavaScript way of doing things, you can add it, Webpack import it. That all still works too. Looking at, here's some HTMX. This is our navigation link from before to the next season. And we've added a whole bunch of new custom attributes to it. Our href is gone, and instead we have an hx get. So that's still going to make a get request like a link would normally. We've got a HX trigger that says to click. That works like a link still. We click the link and it'll make that request. Here's where it starts getting a little more interesting. HX target is we'll assume a selector for an ID called fish list. And our swap says the outer HTML. And then the link text is normal. Plain HTML element, got some extra accoutrement here. What this is telling us is, or what HTMX will interpret this, when you click this, it will make an AJAX request to the endpoint defined in the HX get. It's then going to take the response and look for the fish list ID in our DOM, and then it's going to swap it out. At this point, it's a wholesale swap. So we're going to take that whole outer HTML of that and plop in whatever the response from fish season 2 is. So in this case, fish/season/2 is probably just returning a UL list. So yeah, what's going on? HTMX is going to listen for those events. It's going to make a request with AJAX and then put the response where you say to. And how you say to, all defined with attributes. You can do the full spectrum of verbs, and you can put them on anything. You can put them on links. That's the progressive enhancement way of doing things. You can put them on forms. You can put them on buttons that instead of having the form wrapped around the single button, you can just put a button that says go do this thing. Very cool. Looking at a little more advanced situation, we'll talk about inline table edits. These are notoriously hard because forms are invalid HTML inside a table row. So you can't do table row form, table column TDs, right? So that's, you can call span, but then how are you going to style it? That's going to be ugly. So yeah, this is tough. Thankfully, we've got HTMX. So in our table, we've got a head that I've omitted. It says delete row example, but that's not what this is. Anyways, we're going to loop through. This is Razor. If you're not familiar, it's the C# templating thing. So we're going to do a for each and get the fish from our model on the page and list them out. Then we've got this button here. So like that link, it's got an HX get to a page. It looks like it's a special handler of just the row for this fish, and it's going to be the edit. So going to the row page, calling that, or going to the edit page, calling that row handler and getting that back. Where's the swap and the target, you say? They're up at the top. So when you put when you put these attributes at a higher level, it's true for all of the children, which is really handy for something like a table where we want all of these rows to act the same way, right? We've templated out rendering them. So when we click one of these, so we click it, it's going to make a get request to the fish edit resource there, and then it's going to take the closest, so that's that selector is for your ancestors, closest row, and then swap the whole thing. So when we click this, it's going to take the whole row out and replace it wholesale. So on the server side, here's our edit Razor page. If you haven't used Razor pages, they're I think that they're okay, but they instead of having a controller with actions in them, you have a page that has like model properties that then you access in the view, and you have these handlers, on get, on post. You can also make custom ones instead of your actions. So I think I don't mind it. So in this case, this is our server side Razor page. On the edit, we might have a regular on get to return a full page, a regular on post for if you're on that edit page. But here for this row, we're just returning partials. So we've got two special partials that are just a row for a particular fish. So looking at that, here is our edit row partial. We're going to have a table row. It's got some attributes on it. We've got in our columns here, we've got inputs now, instead of the instead of just the text to display. We've also got a button to cancel. So this is interesting here in a cancel situation. It's going to issue a get request and just get back the regular row, the not edit row, to make it display the text again. There's also a cancel up at the top on the whole row, and that's looking for a cancel event. So maybe we want to set up that if you start editing a different row, it's going to fire an event to close this one off, or maybe something else happens. I don't know. I'm struggling to think of some reason that you'd want to cancel this out. You just open up a different table. You keeping this away. So, but similar thing, it's going to replace all of that. And again, we don't have the targets and swaps here because they're still on that table body from before. So those will inherit down. When we save, we've got another button that's going to do a put request. So just like the HX get, but now a put, it's going to Ajax put what? There's nothing here. So we got the URL, the fish edit. That's nice. Just the row, so that's good. We're going to include that last one, the closest table row. So instead of having, a form around all of this, HTMX is going to look for the inputs within this, the element that we direct it to here. So it's going to pull the name and species into the request, send that put up, and execute there. That put would then return make the change, obviously, and then return the viewing row just for this. And that will then update in line as specified up top. Part of this, since we're doing partials, we might change our initial load entirely and just say, hey, I don't want to, write all this every time. So when we loop through our fish for displaying in Razor, we'll just load that partial. And it is important that we're not calling HTMX each time here. This is still rendered on the server and sent back as one big chunk, but we are going to save ourselves some typing, which I'm all about. There's the partial there. Okay, so looking at this, HTMX is super flexible and super low level. It's all of these attributes, right? We're not, it is, stylistically, it has some conventions and ways to do things, but the options are so many, which makes it really expressive and really, really nice. So on request, we've got all of our favorite verbs here. On triggers, you can watch for a click. You can watch for an input to change, to do like hot reloading as you type and stuff like that. You can watch for custom events. You can also do polling, which is pretty handy. So like say every second, refresh this. Your targets, you can swap out just that element, which is the default. You can swap out by selector. It's got nice selector helpers like closest and next and previous to find the other ones around that kind of let you get to it exactly. You can get to it exactly, or you can get to it relatively with those closest and next and things like that. Swap is a big one. Where does it go? There's some neat ones. There, are typical things, either the inner HTML, the outer HTML for your containers, just the text content if you need to do that. You can bring things above. I think probably more often you're doing something either before or after the end. So like if you imagine dynamically loading a validation message, that's probably going to show up before the end, but still in the same, form group container. Whereas if you're doing like an infinite scroll, you'll want that swap to be after the end. Keep adding content as you go down. Delete is a fun one where it'll remove the element out. So that's pretty handy. Like on that last, probably what that example that I started copying was to delete a row, and you click that. And so your HX swap would be delete. It'll remove the row after that request is complete, or none. If you want to trigger something that's not going to actually create any hypermedia, there might be a case you need to do that. You can just leave it as it is. And more. We've got HX Boost. This is a really cool one that makes any link or form into an AJAX request and then just swaps out the whole body of your HTML page. So that's just easy to put on everything. And you can put it on the body and then everything will be impacted by it because it all inherits down from the parent. And then you can override it. But that's nice for immediately creating a nicer user experience where you're not getting that flash of unstyled content because you have to go get the head again and reinterpret it. It's cached or whatever, but you're still getting that full page when you use an old app. So that one's pretty slick. Push state lets you update the URL in history. So that's really important. If you're, getting the next page for something, you want that to update. If you're, changing the search query as you write, you want that to push up there. There's lots of options in that too, since that can get complicated. I know it's not, it's not full on routing. It's still, okay, this resource really points to something else now. So let's do that. Select lets you filter down to only a certain part of the response. So instead of returning a partial, you might get the whole page and say, okay, just give me this div and swap it here. I think it's good to adopt that writing partials, deciding between a partial and a full page paradigm. But if it feels a little extra for just this once, it's a nice little tool. And then vals lets you express values set by JavaScript. So there's this whole other half of this, right? As a JavaScript library, even though most of the time we write it through HTML, if we need to specify like JSON data from somewhere else that maybe we're making some outside call and plugging that in, that's pretty handy. There's also built-in loading and waiting indicators, which is nice. So when you click, it's pretty easy to say, okay, use this as my spinner, or it even just sets the CSS itself if you want to do something more baked into your components. It's got confirm dialogues. There's tons. Go to the website, just click around, look at all the different stuff it can do. And it's all really low levels. So the flexibility is really out there. It then is on you to put those in meaningful places, write your components and do your templating so that you're not putting hundreds of attributes on every element. But lots of options. Thinking about this gets complex, right? We're not doing away with the complexity of a rich UI experience, UX experience rather, or in a complex UI. We still have to deal with some of that, but there are new and creative ways to do it. Here's our example from before, our first like hypermedia response of the fish of the season. We've updated it to be using our HTMX example where we're HX getting the fish and then replacing the fish list. So that's cool. But what's wrong with this? There's something that isn't going to be right if we swap out the fish list with season 2. It still says season 1. The link will still go to season 2. That content will change, but then we've got nowhere else to go. So that's a problem. We could just expand the target. So now we'll swap out the whole page and get, or even, we could wrap a div under fish if we wanted to replace it, get the new nav links, get the different title, all of that. At that point, we might as well just boost it, just put HX boost on there and just let it get the whole thing in a nice way. We could also do what's called an out-of-band swap. And this is where HTMX gets a little magical, one of the places. This lets you update multiple chunks of HTML from just one response. So if we put the attribute HX swap out of band true to other elements in that response, it's going to find them and do something special with them. So here, if we're imagining this is our response from fish season, we've got our list of fish. Great. That's going to swap in where we told it to go on the ID of fish list. Then we've got these other pieces of HTML. We've got our secondary header that we've told it to swap out of band, and we're going to just plug in what the actual season is. So it's not always going to say season 1 or season whatever page you were on. Then we're also going to swap out the nav. So we'll tell you what the next pages are based on this, and also swap that out of band. So HTMX is going to find those IDs. We'd have to add them and then plug that in as it goes. So that's it's a little freaky. It's a little different. It could get really out of hand if you're not careful with it. So, but in a small, on a reasonable page with not a whole lot of stuff, that's pretty slick. That's pretty nice to be able to, obviously you do want to put a push state on something with pages too, like that. If it is paging, but yeah, that's a neat way to handle things. Unique, different, new. You can also dispatch events with the response. So a lot of HTMX kind of metadata and extra actions you can express through headers, both on the request side so that your server knows what to do, and then on the response side so that you can kind of make the whole page a little more interesting. So if you put an HX trigger response header on the response, of a certain name. So like we might say new season or something. I don't know, that's not a good name, but anyways, you put whatever that event is, and then on those elements on our nav and header, we would do an HX trigger for that event. Now that trigger happens, they're going to make whatever GET request. That's too much, right? We don't want every time. Now you're making 3 requests to get the header, get the nav each time the one piece actually updates. That would be a poor solution in this case. But if you think about other scenarios where you have 2 wholly unrelated pieces of HTML, of media, maybe something in your layout that might need an update every now and then as you're working, but it doesn't happen every time. A JavaScript event trigger would be great for that. Like, gosh, what about here's something that I've run into. You rename yourself and then you've got your name up there and it's not accurate because the cookies are wrong. I don't know. That's something that you could say, hey, just change that out to be their new name from the database. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. But anyways, there's lots of things you can do with this. And it's pretty cool. Yeah, going even further.
Hey, Patrick,
Oh, yeah.
I think Glenn had to raise his hand. Do you still have a question,
Hey.
Glenn?
I now I'm gonna have to remember what my question was 8 minutes ago. No. So when you were talking specifically about like out of band updates that allowed you to affect change across multiple regions of the existing DOM, is there what is the benefit at that point of doing that versus just taking a full page payload again?
I would say if your whole page is a slow loading page, right? If the meat of the work is something unrelated to those elements, that seems like a good case. And I think that's what makes these pages feel slow, is when the server activity takes so long that it's got to churn out everything on a given page. You can do lazy loading too with things like that, where you have an element that's not going to load at first, get the whole page back quickly, and then something else populates out. But yeah, I do think in practice, you probably want to use it more sparingly than not. That's a great question to ask. Why don't I just boost this? Why don't I just, do it that way? Because it can get pretty hairy. So
yeah, I mean, because it strikes me that you still also have to be able to support to like in the example you're giving here, right? Like I've got a season 1 and it navs to a season 2, and I want to do like a little tweaky partial page update when I nav to season 2 from season 1. But the reality is I also need to be able to support direct navigation to the season 2 URL, which is going to do a full page load.
Yep. Yeah.
So do I have to manage like awareness between like when I'm doing one versus the other?
Yeah, you do. And that's a great example. That's a great example of how we leverage, or how HTMX leverages headers intelligently. So when you read those headers, you see it's coming from HTMX, to return with the partial instead of the full page. So it does add a little bit of extra, if return else type stuff in your handlers or in your actions based on that.
How do you handle that header awareness, like on the server side in a HTMX agnostic framework, like if I was doing Razor pages?
So we're in just a moment. We'll go into
I'll be patient.
.NET
I'm
stuff.
sorry. Okay.
But those are great questions. I think I'm glad that to talk about that, because that is sort of like that's a huge issue with this, is having to do both of those at the same time.
Yeah.
Really quickly, though, there are lots of extensions. In addition to all these other options, there are things like with error handling, nice like timeout removal that you'd want for a toast, triggers for disabling. There's also, some of them are supported by the team firsthand, like preload. I don't know if y'all saw that very viral like parts catalog site that everybody was like, dang, it's so fast. And they're like, oh, they're just doing lots of prefetching. So that's something that's pretty built in or easily extended into HTMX. Hyperscript is a standalone JavaScript library that's inspired by HyperCard. That's, kin. It really enhances inline JavaScript, which got some like domain specific languages around it. I'm not totally sold on it, but it's cool. HyperCard's neat, so but it's neat to there. You can also add in front end state with something like Alpine JS, or even to do a page that's still a spa, right? There's nothing that says HTMX is the only answer when you're working on this. And then finally, it's got a rich JavaScript API so that behind the scenes, you can still do all these interactions. You can still make these requests or do triggers and stuff in JavaScript. Let's talk about .NET. ASP.NET Core is great, gets a bad rap, but model binding, easy interacting with context, lots of middleware. The rest, it's very nice. All of these work well with it. I think my favorites, no surprise, right? What's Patrick's favorite? Oh, it's the F# one. Giraffe is really clean because you just define these endpoints and can return views. Microsoft's holding out on us for not giving us that syntax yet. Minimal APIs have to be JSON. So just, I don't know if Carter does this. Carter, I think, can return strings. So, but I don't know if you get the templating there. You need good templating. You need partials and tag. Oh, here's your question, Glenn. All of these, there is great middleware and helpers and libraries for HTMX that integrate with your request, your context and everything. That's all just little extension methods. Bam. Easy to see and easy to add to the responses too, right? Because if you're adding all these, we're typically not adding extra headers to our responses. So having these nice ways to come in and add it. Probably you're going to do some special, some site-wide filters or some attributes or things to make that a little easier. But that library is like, yeah, you got to have it, but it's out there and it's good. Khalid Aboukamed's blogs go a lot into how to use those libraries. So I would, if you're curious about that, that would be the place I would go. Templating. You got to have good templating because we're writing all this HTML. And that's, spots have great templating. That's part of what, they knew they needed that. We've got partials, we've got tag helpers and view components. Those are kind of newer. I don't know. I think they're okay, but they're not my favorite. Razor components, which is the confusing name for how you write Blazor, are a lot nicer. You can render them in non-Blazor context now, but that's a little clunky too. Blazor itself feels like it's getting really close to this with their static server-side rendering, and you're like defining the page up there. And the blogs I found on it seems like it still gets caught up in its own component model. So you're not quite able to do the like I'm returning pure HTML, but we're that close. So I think it could happen, and I think when that happens, that would be the way I would want to write an HTMX, hypermedia system. I also read about a side project called Razor Slices that it's kind of like what's missing, where you write a minimal API endpoint that then returns a Razor component or a view or something. So I don't know if that's ready for prime time, but that's an interesting project. Or you could use Giraffe from F#. Hot reloading is really important. This is something that wasn't, and it really ruled out using .NET because it's slow to start that server, and you're needing to restart constantly because all of your media is coming from the server side. So now we've got .NET Watch. I don't know if you've used it, but it's slick. It is fast. It just watches for changes and restarts. You can be adding new pages, adding new endpoints, even like if you're using, message passing frameworks, it'll watch those and update, and most of the time be able to catch them. You can tell it it knows when it needs to restart, so you can tell it just restart. I've gotten into trouble because I'm not watching nullable warnings anymore because I'm always .NET watching and I don't ever run the compiler and look at the problem. So, I always have a top of every PR or the bottom of every PR. So fix all my nullable warnings. .NET Watch, super slick. Even if you're not going to use HTMX, I wholeheartedly recommend it. No, we're coming close to time. I want to answer questions. So why do I like this? It's a simple workflow. It's extremely flexible. It's fast. It's accessible with the progressive enhancement. It's expressive. That's why I love F#. I want my code to really tell me what's going on. I want to be able to speak with my code in a way that represents what's really going on, that represents the world. And I feel like the hypermedia itself is way more expressive than JSON as far as writing a server and what it does. So HTMX kind of just lets you get in there and really sing your song. Why not? Boy, howdy. Lots of people want to tell you why not. I'm singing the praises. You just Google HTMX. You go to whatever Reddit that is that they keep kicking them out of, and you can hear why not. It's become a meme. They sell these HTMX sucks shirts and mugs on their site. Um, they're kind of trolls. Anyone can be the CEO of HTMX. I'm not. I'm thinking about becoming a CEO of HTMX, but it's yeah. A lot of people don't like it. There's been a really strong negative reaction to it because it's a completely different paradigm. And I feel like I'm not a licensed therapist, but I feel like there are people who are like, I work in this industry and this is so foreign to me and maybe a little threatening for what, if you're able to achieve with much less what I've spent years learning, that really sucks. And I feel for that. But yeah, there's a lot of hate online. And even on their website, you can go, there are negative essays on the HTMX website. Go read them. There are some like truly ill-suited scenarios. One of the essays is from the Gumroad decided not to use HTMX. I think some of those were fear related, fear of the new paradigm, or as some people said, a skill issue. But one of the points was totally valid. If you need like constant full page real-time updates, like if you're doing collaborative editing or like games or that sort of thing, that's not going to work. That just sounds crazy. If you have tons of front end state in some other situation, it's not a fit. There's no front end state. You can add in libraries to manage that, but like if that's the whole deal, you probably want a tool that's intended for those sorts of situations. Finally, there's some friction with .NET. It's not the best templating, like I had mentioned before. Razor's really nice for writing stuff on the server side, but if you're starting to want to nest them and be a little smarter about that, it falls apart until we can get Blazor style ones. Again, not the best server endpoints unless you're using Giraffe. And then there's also some annoying magic, which one of the things that makes ASP.NET Core great is the middleware and the magic and all that. Anti-forgery tokens are you may not notice, but when you are in a Razor view and you do form, it highlights different. It's not form as an HTML thing. It's actually a tag helper that is secretly embedding the hidden anti-forgery token input into your form. If you start using HTMX, that goes away. You can add both. You had to add something on the server and on the client to make sure that that's happening. But there's some annoying magic that you have to walk around if you still want that smooth experience, or that smooth developing experience. Because oh boy, you could still use, right, the progressive enhancement way would still to be putting forms and just using HTMX, but that's not an option always. So some things to think about. It's annoying, but it's one of those solved problems that I'm just going to go copy paste this from that blog, and now it's not a problem. I'm going to leave you with this haiku from their website: JavaScript fatigue, longing for a hypertext already in hand. Thank you. We got a little bit of time for questions. I do have to leave shortly after 1, but come find me. I'll be on 6th Street tonight for Halloween. You can come argue. Please don't come argue with me about dev tonight. But you can email me. You can tweet at me. Or if you see me out some other time, not on Halloween, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
So you can look for the garden.
That's right.
I had a question, which is probably something simple that I just missed in the talk. So you have the HX get that pulls from whatever, and then you have the target that shoves it in there. How does it translate from the JSON into your model?
So you're not responding with JSON, it's responding with HTML. So there's no translation necessary. It's all, I guess that's a big point, is that when we're writing our API now, everything's returning hypermedia
So your API
HTML.
has to return HTML, I guess, is
Right.
the
Right.
point.
Yeah. So your server is now, and you can, in the book, they talk about this, that you might have a scenario where you still want a JSON API. And now it's, your backend developers have to put on their thinking caps to make sure that they're not doing a lot of extra work. But if you've got, a mobile app or, other integrations that would use JSON, that's definitely a possibility that you've got that API. But overall, returning straight HTML as an API becomes a lot simpler. You don't need to do versioning, right? It's just, those options, everything's encoded in that response. So, it feels weird at first, but it ends up becoming pretty straightforward.
So I guess practically it'd be like you have a BFF and internally maybe it still calls whatever APIs, but ultimately it spits out HTML back to your front end for stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're, maybe not calling an API, but maybe making a, like a request to, if you've got a distributed system, you're passing a message off to go do something else and get that.
You're effectively, you're making a request to your web server.
Yeah.
And you have to think about it as making a request to the web server, not to quote unquote your API.
Right. Yeah, I think the API, as you know it in a SPA context, sort of goes away.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting.
Which is also threatening. We've spent so long figuring out how to write good documentation for our APIs. What if we don't need it? Who's going to maintain all those libraries? What are they going to do? Anyways, any other questions?
I think this is this is less a question than an observation, but I think that I've been around the Mobius strip of software engineering best practices a few times now, and you just keep going and you just keep coming back to where you started from, but like on the other side of the strip, right?
Yeah.
And early on in my career and early on in web development, the assumption was that all content payload development was server-side rendered. And then we had this gradual swing over us, and then we had a period of time where it was assumed that you would do mostly server-side and then a little bit of client-side. And then we swung to, no, like, bro, the way to do this is like, just ship your data to the browser and then do all of it client-side. And then all of those frameworks over another 5-year period started saying like, maybe there's a place for some server-side rendering after all.
Yeah.
And I see that HTMX in particular is sort of like leading that edge back to the wave of like, actually your default is, we're going to do like default server-side rendering.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
again, and so I'm seeing a lot of this stuff that comes full circle, but this is an interesting sort of middle ground of like the payload rendering is happening server side, but the interaction modeling is happening client side still. And that's an interesting hybrid.
Yeah, it's definitely neat. I feel like I don't know. This is way far out looking, but when I look at some of these, and I feel like this is what the authors of HTMX would like, is if how vanilla JavaScript sort of, when everyone's pulling in jQuery every time to do these interactions, over time JavaScript starts working that way. Now you don't really need jQuery to do all those things. I think it'd be neat if eventually HTML has some of these built in as it expands ways to do some of these interactions. But that's a decades type view more than anything. But I do think as a default, and then pull in the SPA when you need to. I don't know about y'all, but I'd write a lot of CRUD apps, and I don't feel like it needs this whole front end tool chain. So yeah. Hey,
I'm curious, like, and we're running late on time a little bit, I guess, here, but like, I'm I'm assuming that the HTMX framework itself handles things like browser history snapshotting on some of these navigations.
Yeah, yeah. So there's an attribute that says with this interaction, push that state up. You can even tell it to push something specific into the history.
Okay.
So yeah, because that's another important concern. There's really it seems like they've thought of everything. It's not always simple, but
Yeah.
it's out there. The book, the hypermedia system book, really starts and it's like, wow, this is cool. And they're like, wait, but what about this problem? What about this problem? And they kind of, you see how they sort of arrived at these different options and solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, that deep linking has been a real issue on my team for the last several years, and building single page apps and being able to get that right so that people can like share links into the app and state management and be able to get somebody back to like the thing I was looking at in the way I was looking at it. And I find that's something that's a lot harder to implement and get consistently right.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right. So we're past the time. Richard, I see that you have a question. Is it a quick one?
Yeah, sure. The question's quick. So Patrick, I mean, one of the biggest problems we find with this is often tracing or tracking, especially the out of bounds, when messages don't show up. You know, what do you use for debugging and tracing?
When you say when messages don't show up, what do you mean? Like you're
on
not
the
getting
client side, because if you forget to put like the pound sign to make it you know, the ID or the you know, when you're trying to push it to a certain place on a page, and you could see it leaving the server and it doesn't show up, and you sit there for 30 minutes going, I think I'm doing it right. I mean, we wrote some tools ourselves to see what was getting sent on the HTMX, you know, the output, so I could see exactly what's being sent. I could see if I had well-formed HTML, right? Because that's the other kind of thing. It's got to be well-formed HTML for the browser to like it, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons they say use the unminified version. Go put a breakpoint in the, you know, the wiring for these and see that it's not finding it, or that sort of thing, which isn't the best answer, right? Because I mean, it's small, but it's not it's not simple. It's doing a lot on behind the scenes.
That's one of the big challenges. Usually I find I've named the target slightly incorrectly, and it takes ages to debug those things. So
I think if you're using a language that has like strong typing in the templating, that's a way to do it. That might be overkill, but like if you're able to get that autocomplete, that's one thing I can think of. I also think this is pretty new, you know, the tooling catches up. So I think, you know, right now it might be a little painful, but
we use it a lot with Django. It works great with Django. It really does.
Yeah, the book is all in all of its server. I think it's Flask, but it's all Python. And yeah, it just seems those lightweight servers. I know I went to another talk that was about what did they use? Bun. So it's, yeah, I don't know. It's probably a lot of people would say don't use .NET, but you know, here we are at .NET at noon, so I'm telling you that you should.
Oh no, it's cool. I'm excited.
Yeah.